Hello and welcome to 20th episode of Dream Life. Today we have a special guest, Julian, joining us from New York, and we're going to talk about relationship. And I'm going to start right off with welcoming Julian to this program. Thank you so much for coming and actually giving us this opportunity to talk about what you've been doing, what's your passion, why have you chosen to do this? So tell me a little bit about yourself, Julian. How did you start it?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. So I actually have been a teacher of yoga for about 20 years, and a little over 6 years ago, about 6.5 years ago, I started to do relationship coaching because it was based on an unfortunate experience in my life. It was a divorce. And I became obsessed with what makes a relationship work and what makes a relationship thrive. And yeah, that's what I do. And I work with couples. I work with people who also individuals. I work with people who are single looking for love. I work with people who are in long marriages, new marriages, parents, and all of that. Yeah.
Great. That's a big part of our life, really. I mean, relationship, it affects our personal life, our mental health, everything. It's kind of the cream of the crop of our life. If we really don't pay attention to it and kind of ignore it or overlook things, and we find ourselves in some situations that we don't have a lot of options, and most people have that. That fall in their relationship, and comes a time that you can't do much. So the best thing is to really talk about this, identify what's going on, and today we're going to talk about that. I'm going to ask you in a little bit to what are our options, what can we do to equip ourselves with this, this relationship. It's a big part of our life, and how can we get help? For example, let me ask you right off the bat, like you explained, why did you started this? Let's say, for example, just to have our audience, identify with this discussion that we're doing right now. Why do we fight? People that love one another, they're dying to start their life, and what happens? Why do we fight?
Well, the short answer is the people who love each other fight because they're afraid. So that's the very simple short answer. The longer answer is that the reason why people who love each other fight is because, there's a number of reasons. The first would be that, we all have our own unique perspectives of any given situation. And so let's say a couple is dealing with a certain circumstance or situation. One person sees it one way, the other person sees it another way, and those perspectives clash. And people fight because they don't really realize that anything that we look at, we're looking at through the lens of our history. We're looking at through the lens of our trauma. We're looking at through the lens of something that happened to us when we were 5 years old with our mother or father, right? So there are certain things that trigger you that wouldn't trigger me, right? Or trigger someone in a relationship that doesn't trigger someone else. And we all come to a relationship with baggage. It's impossible not to. We all have a history. We all have different parents. We all have all of this. And so when you come to a relationship, you're bringing your past with you. And when we don't, sometimes, first of all, what I'll just say off the bat is that it's not unhealthy to fight. It's actually the couples who never fight, I'm more suspicious of. I really am. It's normal. If you're living with someone, of course you're going to clash. I think that what we're talking about today, however, is the fighting that can't seem to stop, or the fight that never gets resolved, or the fight that really where a couple has a very hard time repairing the fight. That's different than like, I need space. Like you're getting
Yeah.
on my nerves. It's a very different thing.
Yeah, I was just going to elaborate on what you said in the beginning. The fact that if we really understand that we do come from different culture, from different, let's say, family, from different psychology, and what happened to us, to the time that we got together with this person, just understanding that, I think it takes awful lot of pressure of everybody, so they can stop blaming one another and stop blaming something that has nothing to do with this. It's just the way we are. It's sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It's just a different look. You go to a party, 10% of the people, they're wearing beautiful dresses, 10% wearing horrible outfits, and 80% are just different. They're not bad or good or bad, they're just different. So just understanding the fact that we come from different background, I think that ought to take some pressure off both sides, so they can give each other a little room to kind of understand and kind of digest the whole thing. Don't you think so?
Yes, but it takes a lot for people to do that, because the thing is, it's not just that. It's I'm hurt and I'm not being listened to. People don't listen. People don't take responsibility for when they hurt someone. They don't take responsibility for their own baggage. And so if a couple finds themselves in a repetitive cycle of fighting, chances are what I will find is that they're not taking responsibility, for their perspectives. They're not taking responsibility for the way they may have hurt the other person, even if they did not mean to. And they're probably talking more than they should and not listening enough. So we get into, the thing is, we have two sides to us as human beings. We have our instinct, and then we have our more conscious self, our higher self. And the part of us that's instinctual is going to protect, we're going to protect ourselves. We're going to go into fight or flight. And if something triggers us, our nervous system is going to register that as I'm unsafe. Therefore, I must go to battle. For some people, going to battle means yelling. For some people, going to battle is shutting down, right? That's their flight or freeze response. And then we have the part of us that's sort of the higher self. It's the part of us that has awareness. It's the part of us that has reason. It's the part of us that has compassion. It's the part of us that's able to listen. And fighting, usually when a fight occurs, and the big fights, it's two people behaving and reacting from their primal instinct rather than from their compassion and from their heart. And so they get stuck in a story of, he did this to me, or she didn't do this. And they get very caught up in a story. And what they tend to do is that they tend to see, instead of seeing their partner or their spouse, they see a monster that's going to eat them, that's going to destroy them. And so that's the real reason why people fight.
It's so if I want to ask you, for example, I mean, you might have answered it in a different ways, but if we can put them like in a 1, 2, 3 or ABC format, what do we do? How do we repair a fight? I mean, things happen. We know things are going to happen. We're either not going to like what the other person says, or we're going to interpret it the way that it's more hurtful, or it meant something much more hurtful than what they meant in the first place. So, and things happen, and we say things, and that hurts us. That keeps us kind of disengaged and disassociated with that person. So we feel that gap. How do we fix that? How would you start? Just put it in a simple way that we can, the audience can really relate to, and they can take something home.
Sure. So number one, when you are engaged in a fight, like I said, your nervous system becomes very reactive. The first thing to do is to calm yourself. Mm-hmm. And that might mean I need to take a time out. I need to go for a walk. I need to splash some water on my face. I need to breathe. because we tend to stop breathing. So the first thing to do is to take care of your nervous system and your body, your physiology, right off the bat. And you can really do that with a deep breath. A deep breath in and a deep breath out. Because you have to slow it down. You have to slow it down. Because think about it, when you're in a fight, your blood starts to boil, your face gets red, all the energy starts to go up, and we become very reactionary. We become animals. We become the animal part of ourselves. We lose all the rationality, depending on the severity of the fight. But if you're really triggered, and most people, when they're in a relationship, no one really has the power to trigger us more than the person who we are intimate with, right? So that's number one.
So that's let me just, before we get to number two, I just want to kind of crystallize this, what you said. So realizing that this thing is not going to work, it's going in the wrong direction, that's the first step, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, you have to realize that and be like, I need to take a deep breath.
Okay.
Like, I need to chill out for a second. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. And the breath is so important because we have to create space between the words that we say, and we have to, often when we fight, we say things that we don't mean. We say things in the heat of the moment. And you really want to try to avoid saying something that you're going to regret later. So you do that with a deep breath. If you're really, really overwhelmed, you tell your partner, I'm going to take a walk. I'm going to come back. I'm not leaving this conversation, but I just need a timeout to get myself in order. And then the person who's receiving that, because a lot of women, for example, will hear that and they'll be like, you can't walk away from me, don't run away. Like they'll get afraid that their husband is actually shutting down. But if you can say, I just need to take this break, I'm going to come right back. And then she has to say, okay, I'm going to take a time out as well because I'm getting out of hand as well. So that's step one. And then step two is to take turns being the speaker and the listener. So one person gets to speak while the other person listens. And when the person speaks, there can be no accusation. There has to be 100% responsibility. And basically what that person has to say is, this is what I saw happen. This is the meaning I gave it, the story that I'm making up about it, that I'm not enough or, whatever it is, you don't care. It made me feel, and then you have to really speak to emotion, sad, angry, frustrated, betrayed, whatever it is. And then the listener has a harder task because they're going to be like, what do you mean? That's not what I meant. You have to shut up. That person has to really shut up and listen and breathe while the other person doesn't point the finger. They just explain their experience of it and how it made them feel. Then you switch. The person who is the speaker becomes the listener becomes the speaker. And in that moment, what is really needed is compassion. People have to remember that there isn't a monster standing in front of you. And if you really, really, really believe that your spouse is a monster, then you really, really, really should not be in that relationship anymore. Right? But you just have to say, okay, I love this person. I'm angry with them right now, but I still see that there's the human who I love behind it. Let me listen. And then the third step would be to come to some sort of agreement, some sort of compromise of, okay, well, I see that when I come home, this is just an example, when I come home and I don't greet you the way that you want me to greet you, I'm going to come home and start to greet you, And then the other person is going to say, great, I'm going to really when you come home and after you greet me and you need an hour to yourself to decompress, I'm going to give you that hour to yourself. I'm just giving a very baseline sort of example. But so the repair process is starting with your physiology, getting calm, then taking turns being the speaker and the listener, the listener really listening with their heart, the speaker really taking responsibility for their perspective rather than blame. And then the third part is coming to some sort of agreement. And that's where, if there's been a fight that's been happening over and over and over again, the agreement part, they might need a third party, but some people can actually come to some sort of agreement on their own. And that's, in a nutshell, the repair process.
Yeah, wonderful. And while you were talking, I was thinking about, we have covered the emotional part in details, but again, I think it's interesting that we mention it again. You know, our emotions, they can go high and low, extreme to extremes, and that all has to do with, you know, how we interpret things and how we give meaning to things. And that's what we get, like you were just saying, you know, when we look at that person says something or does something and we see a monster, and it's not really that easy to talk to a monster, let alone to love them. So we have to change those submodalities. We have to really look at that person, I mean, see it as it is, not worse than it is, right? Yes. Things happened, you know, things should not have been the way it is, but the same person did this, that person loved me, did all these things for me. So to have that balanced thinking, I think, has to do a lot with controlling our emotions. And I would love to hear your input on that. And once we get into, you know, like overlooking our emotions, we're like sitting on a little you know, kite, and the wind is blowing and we're on the ocean. We can be, you know, 20 feet low and 50 feet high, and that's not the way really to talk to another person, because the person trying to find you and, you know, talk to you and kind of make that connection, that communication, if you go that high and low, it's kind of, you know, impossible.
Well, I'm not a fan of controlling emotions.
Okay.
Because when it comes to love, I mean, yes, you have to control your anger and all of that, but when it comes to love, you know, two people just being rational, like tell a woman to be rational, like that doesn't work. But what does work is vulnerability. What doesn't work is blame. What does work is accountability. But there is a difference between being angry and telling your partner off, right? Mm-hmm. Telling them off and just like, that's not good. That's where you do have to have control. You do. See, I believe that you have to control your behavior, but you don't necessarily have to control your emotions, but it's the way you relate your emotions. So you could be angry at your partner and blame and call them names, and that is completely unacceptable. But you could also be angry at your partner and be angry and cry and be like, I know you can do better. This really, really hurt me. Mm-hmm. I'm so angry at you because this hurt me so much. And they're really emoting in that moment. I would never tell that person, control your emotions.
Yeah, not so much. I really didn't wanna. I don't know if it looked like, you know, I'm talking about controlling emotion, but what I was trying to say is how emotions form. You know, the meaning that we give to the events or the words or whatever it might be. How we, you know, define those. That's going to create an emotion. I wasn't really talking about how we can do that. And once we do that, because most of the times, think about it. In a room, 5 people sitting, something happens. We have 5 different opinions. Some people might get very angry. The other person is like a joke of the history. I mean, the century. So it's how we define things, how we give meaning to things. That's a big part. And I'm just throwing this in as a tool that people can use, because sometimes we can go to the extreme and we don't really have to take that. Somebody says something, it hurt me, fine. But, you know, define as like, you know, this guy stabbed me. That's a very different thing than saying something. He said something, you know, that wasn't appropriate or wasn't nice, or she or he didn't have to do that. It's just the way we state things, because these emotions trigger our next action. I remember reading something from William James, the prominent American psychologist. He said, not all emotions end up with the good result, but they always end up in an action. Because these emotions are really what propel us, compelling us to take actions. And if we are not equipped, and we are not aware of our emotions, not so much about controlling them, but to be aware of them and kind of keep that balance. And I totally agree with you. We have emotions, and we have to respect that. We have to understand that, and we have to not that suppress that. That's not that. I don't agree with that as well. But just understanding how they form, so we can at least eliminate or minimize those emotions that causing us taking those actions or saying things that later on we're having a hard time to repair. That's what I meant.
Yeah, I mean, so the way I look at it is a little bit differently.
That's why we're here. You want to see different
yeah. I mean, absolutely. It is the meaning that you assign it. It's like people don't fight with each other. They fight with the worst stories that they've created about each other.
Absolutely.
They fight with the story that's in their head. They hear one thing, they get triggered, they get filled with emotion, then they come up with a whole narrative that's based on their whole filter. And then all of a sudden, in the narrative, they're the victim, their partner is the villain, and that's what perpetuates the fighting. So 100% I agree with that. The emotion part, though, is, well, once you have that heightened emotion, how are you going to express it? And you can express it in a way that is manifested in erratic, inappropriate behavior, or you can express it in a way where it's coming from your heart and you are vulnerable. And not enough people are vulnerable with each other.
That's a great technique right there.
Yeah, they have to be vulnerable with each other.
Yes, and that makes total sense, because once we are vulnerable, we're not thinking about ourselves anymore. We're thinking about the other person. I mean, isn't that what love is? Putting other person's need ahead of yours, thinking about that person, looking into fulfilling that person's need, on top of your own. Isn't that the unconditional love? And without, honestly, we're human beings. We're not going to have unconditional love all along our lives. Of course, things happen, we change, we have different emotions. But that should be, I think, the kind of directive that we have to keep in mind, that whatever is happening, if you look at it, what do I want? Am I serving this person, or I just want them to do something for me? Am I thinking about, like Tony Robbins says, if you can fulfill all the 6 human needs of a person, that person not going to go anywhere. Even if you do 4 of them, that's the secret to have an addiction. That person will be addicted to you. So I think that's important, and the factor that when we think like that, I'm just elaborating on what you said, being vulnerable, because once you think all about the other person, you're not thinking about yourself. You're defenseless. Your guards are down. You're just thinking, what can I do for you? And that is vulnerable, and that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's not really vulnerable. I agree with you, and I think that meeting each other's needs, that's a whole other conversation, because we could talk just an hour on that, and you're absolutely right. But vulnerability is not about meeting the other person's needs. Vulnerability is about, I'm no longer going to protect myself with my ego and close my heart and be mean. Vulnerability is, I'm going to open my heart and I'm going to let you see how hurt I am, as opposed to punishing you, as opposed to blaming you, as opposed to putting up a wall. Most people put up walls. Couples who are struggling because of their walls. some are struggling because they have no boundaries, for sure, but a lot of time it's fear. And vulnerability is, I'm not going to put up a wall. I'm not going to make myself inaccessible to you. You're going to have access to my heart. I'm going to show you I'm going to tell you what I'm afraid of. Because what perpetuates a fight is people feeling like they can't break through to the other person. But if we put our defenses down, if we lay down the sword, and we are just raw with each other, that really is what creates intimacy. And so that's more of what I meant by vulnerability. And honestly, if I were going to give one golden nugget, one golden rule for couples who are struggling, I would tell them, learn how to be more vulnerable with each other. Because all that story and all that fighting is the mind's way of trying to protect ourselves. It's all the workings of the mind. It's not the working of the heart.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, these we can argue back and forth on these, and I agree with you. And these concepts are kind of intertwined. You don't know where one starts and when the other ends. So it can be looked at from different. We don't want to make this discussion so philosophical, but they do really. They involve. They have. Connections in a different levels with one another. But the main thing is, yes, and I agree 100% with you. I mean, how do we act towards a little baby? I mean, the big guy, 6 foot tall, lays down and sounds like a little kid and trying to make that connection with that baby. And I think we tend to forget in the beginning, how we started, how we loved that person, how we cherished, how vulnerable we were, and how important was that person to us. And if we just kind of can go back and think about how we saw this person when we met in the first time or first years or months, just go back and kind of recall, because our mind it's in a way that when we do something, it can go back to that state of mind. It can trigger those feelings, those emotions. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
So that's not a bad thing. Just go back and look at it. The time that we were so in love. What happened? And I don't really care about what happened as much as why can't we have that? Why don't we love that? Why don't we, have that passion and care for one another? And it's just a new beginning, a new start. I think it's a great thing in my personal life. I can say that. I think the greatest thing is to learn how to start again, start all over, and not be defeated, not be, you can fall but you can get up. It doesn't matter. You have to be like a ball. Some people say, when you hit the ground, bounce back. Don't stay there.
Yeah.
If you can. I think it's can't remember his name. Les Brown. He says if you can look up, you can get up. Just get up, and just get up and be, believe that things are possible. Believe that you can do things, and believe in yourself. I believe, because if we don't believe in ourselves, hardly people are going to believe in us. So I agree, and it's so beautiful. I think the relationship could be a blessing and could be a curse, and I think learning all these concepts that we talked about and kind of expanding our life, it's going to help us to kind of change our direction towards making it a blessing instead of a curse, because not only we get hurt and our kids get hurt, our surrounding people who care about us, they get hurt. And unfortunately, most of these shortcomings in relationships, they have this vicious cycle and they keep repeating themselves, and from the one generation to another. And we can be a good example of putting a stop to that. And like somebody once said, don't buy what your kids didn't have, but teach them what you didn't know. So try to pass it on to our children so we can have a better family, better, for God's sake, country, for better life all over we can see what's happening all over the world. Most of it is misunderstanding and not understanding, not listening, like you were explaining perfectly. So I appreciate that. Really, it's a big concept, and it's a beautiful subject, I think, to talk. And I do admire you, because relationship is not everybody's cup of tea. Most people just don't want to deal with relationship. It's a tough area to work with, and I admire you for taking these clients on and being so successful. Thank you so much. And please tell me, what do you think? You wanna for the closing of this program, if you have anything in mind, you have any suggestions or an advice as a relationship expert?
No, I mean, I just wanted to tell people that, my Instagram is all about giving advice. So I don't use my Instagram for selfies or anything like that. It's all free advice. So if people wanted to go to my Instagram, it's just my full name at Jillian Turecki, or they can go to jillianturecki.com to learn more about me. And that's how you just get, if you want to hear doses of relationship advice, that's where you go.
Wonderful. I'm sure people who want to learn, they will look at it, and I'm asking our viewers to get in contact with Jillian. She's such a, besides being a professional, she's such a great person with great heart and a lot of passion for human beings and their relationship and for their well-beings. And with this, we come to the end of this episode. I want to thank you so much, Jillian, for giving us the opportunity to talk with you and discuss some of the most important issues in our lives.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll see you again.
See ya.
Bye-bye. Bye. And with this, we come to the end of this episode. I hope and pray that this was helpful and beneficial to those viewers who are looking for these answers or have similar issues. And please do not hesitate to visit her Instagram and website to learn more about the relationship, because this is a big part of our life. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next episode.